What if I told you that you were created to change the world? What if I told you that when you look out in the world and you see all the problems and the challenges, what if I told you that the answer to solving so many problems that exist around us, that answer is found inside of you? It's found inside of me. It's found inside of all of us. What would you do? Would you believe me if I told you that? What if you believed just for a moment that God created you to be a disruptor? What if I told you that disruption isn't always a bad thing? And that there are some systems that exist around us. There's some ways of being that exist around us, some problems, some challenges that exist in this world. And sometimes we accept it as normal. What if I told you that we were created to disrupt hopelessness, to disrupt despair, to disrupt hate? What if I told you that you are a disruptor and that you were made to be a disruptor so that all can thrive? Hey, I'm Jesiah. I'm the host of the Disrupt podcast. This is episode 0, and I just wanted to give a little introduction about what this podcast is all about. The Disrupt podcast is about encouraging individuals to disrupt the status quo in their life and embrace God's purpose. I'm better when you're better. You're stronger when I'm stronger. Collectively, us as a people, we benefit from the things that God places inside of each and every one of us. And sometimes it's really easy for us to sit back and look at the world and comment on what's wrong with the world, but forget that the answer is inside of us to do it. That God has uniquely positioned all of us to be solutions to problems. And so when we look at hopelessness, when we look at fear, when we look at hate, when we look at all the things that's wrong with the world, my question to you is, how are you being a solution to the problem? Every morning when I'm about to drop my son off, or my wife is going to take my son and drop him off, I tell my son 3 things. I say, number 1, love the Lord. Number 2, be kind. And number 3, do great things. I tell my son to love the Lord because the Bible tells us that the first great commandment is to love the Lord our God with all we have, with all our might, with all our heart. Second great commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself, and that's why I tell him to be kind. The third one is a little interesting. It's to do great things. And the cool thing, my son, and he's about to turn 3 at the time of this conversation you and I are having, he always asks me, he says, "Daddy, what does it mean to do great things?" And I tell him, well, son, if you love the Lord with all you have, you're obedient to everything that he tells you to do, you remember to be yourself, you try hard, you will do great things. Can't help it. We were designed to do great things. We were created to do great things. And oftentimes we are delivered a way of doing, a way of being. We are told that in order to function in the world around us, it has to look a certain way. It's got to feel a certain way. It's got to sound a certain way. Remember back when I was growing up, I would go to a place called Chuck E. Cheese. Remember you would go to Chuck E. Cheese? And Chuck E. Cheese always had this one game, and I'm sure those that existed at other arcades, and have like this whack-a-mole game, and the mole would always pop up outside of the hole. And the objective of the game was to take this mallet. It's kind of a cruel game when you think about it, and whack the mole that dared to stick his head up out of the hole. Sometimes in our society, in our cultures, and there are many different types of culture, whether it's a church culture, there's a business culture, and many different spaces of our culture, it feels like whack-a-mole. If an individual dares to stick their head up outside the hole, dares to stick their head up outside of what others are choosing to do, what they think is possible, what they've been shown is possible. The system oftentimes encourages us to eliminate the variable, to stop dissent. God is encouraging us and beckoning us to grow in Him so that we can change the world that way. How can you be light in the middle of darkness? How can you represent hope in the middle of hopelessness? How can you disrupt the status quo, disrupt what people say is possible, and represent who God is in the moment? One day we were at my grandmother's house. We were eating some food that she made, and she was concerned that we were putting too much salt on our food. And she said something which really doesn't make any sense. She said, "You should barely be able to taste the salt." And I remember thinking to myself, well, if you can't taste the salt, then why in the world would we add it? Right? And so sometimes what we do is we end up teaching ourselves and our children to blend in. We teach ourselves and we teach our children to learn to be as unsalty as possible. Because when we blend in, we're more comfortable. We don't have to worry about being that mole that gets whacked because we stood our head up outside the hole. But I want to encourage you and remind you that we weren't created to blend in. We were created to stand out. The Bible actually calls us peculiar. We were created to have an impact. We were created to change the world. And that's why I tell my son to do great things, because I want him to know early that not only did God create him to do great things, I want him to know that it's possible. It's possible for him to change the world. God made him to change the world. And I want to encourage you. You have been made to change the world. You've been made to challenge the status quo. So often in our world, we teach our children and we're taught ourselves to color inside the lines. Remember back to school when you got your coloring book, it literally would come with lines in it. And you were told, hey, you can color, have a great time, but you were held accountable. You were graded sometimes by how well you colored inside the line that other people provided for you. Don't get me wrong. I believe in structure. I believe in boundaries. Those things are important. The question is, who's the one that's giving you your structure? Who's the one that's giving you your boundaries? Who gave you that book? If it's not God, then perhaps you're supposed to learn to color outside of the lines that society gives you. Color outside the lines that people say you must do, or if you want to help, you have to do it this way. If you want to be a success, you have to be a success this way. Perhaps it's time for us to become disruptors, to challenge the status quo, not for vainglory or not for the purpose of just being contrary, but the purpose of being uniquely impactful in ways that the world has never seen before. I believe that I think someone once said that the graveyard is the richest place on the planet. Why? Because there are dreams and cures and inventions and amazing things that died with people because they let it sit inside of them and they never brought it forth. Well, this podcast can be a vehicle to encourage you to take those things that are inside of you, let God cultivate them, and to drive them forward so that one, God will be glorified. Two, you will be fulfilled. And three, the world will be better because of you. So often, again, in our world, we are taught a way to do certain things. If you want to do this, you have to do it this way. And there is no other way to do it other than this way. And the problem with only functioning in ways that we've seen or that we've heard, we don't have the flexibility to be the unique versions of ourselves that God has made us to be. The Bible says, "Eye have not seen and ear have not heard what God has prepared for those that love him." And if we're made in God's image, if we're made in his likeness, It means that we have to stop trying to function and lean on what we've seen, function and lean on what we've heard, and begin to lean into what God has for us, to lean into who He is. And when we let go of the comfort that comes with the structure that society gives us, then we can begin to lean into the goodness of the Lord and lean into the amazing creativity that He's given us. People that change the world don't follow the rules the world has given them. So I submit to you that God has a plan for you, like He says that He does. God has some amazing things in store for you. God wants to use you in a mighty way, but sometimes we get so set in a particular way of doing things that we don't give God space to use us in unique ways that the world has never seen before. Some of the people that we revere the most throughout history, they were disruptors. They challenged the status quo. Sometimes they made mistakes, right? There are many stories and examples of individuals that made mistakes, but many of them, they operated in unique ways that did challenge the status quo, but because they did, change the world, and the world was never the same before. So to do it, it takes courage. It takes conviction. It takes really understanding who you are, your purpose in this world, and who God is in you. Because it's really easy to move from being a disruptor to move into anarchy and chaos. I'm not saying no structure. I'm not saying do whatever feels good to you. I'm saying follow what God's plan is for you. And oftentimes God's plan for you is outside of the normal. It's outside of what you think is possible. It's outside of what you've seen. And that type of thing excites me. And so what we're going to do in the Disrupt podcast, we're going to encourage you by giving you examples of real life people living right now that are disrupting, people that are challenging what individuals thought was possible, to advance some cause or some mission, individuals that are making a real difference in their community, individuals that are making a difference around this world because they dared to believe God. They dared to embrace who God made them to be. And because of it, the world is a better place. But I believe that that's not just for those individuals. I believe that disruption, or this practice of disruption, is for all of us. Perhaps the greatest disruptor of all time is Jesus. He came into His own, the word says, and His own didn't even receive Him. He challenged the status quo. He wasn't a troublemaker, but He caused trouble for the system that needed to topple so that people could see who God really is. And we're still talking about Him thousands of years later. The greatest selling book of all time is the Bible for a reason. It's because it's about a disruptor, and it's about followers of this disruptor. And we call those followers Christians. So we're going to talk about God, yes, because God ultimately is the one that gives us our plan. Sometimes God is the one sometimes that tells us to step beyond and to move past what we think is possible. He's the one that empowers us to be able to do it. So we have to have that conversation as well. And God does deposit some amazing things inside of us. And God also ensures that as we move forward, He gives us the ability and the power to grow in the gifts and talents that He gives us. Sometimes it is God, it's He Himself that is the cultivator, that's growing us and changing us and challenging us and strengthening us. Sometimes God is putting things inside of us. Sometimes God is working some things out of us, ultimately so that we can be prepared for the promise that He has for us. So He can get us to this place so we can have the most amazing impact on our world around us. So again, I want to encourage you, and I leave you with this thought. What has God called you to do? What is your purpose? Are you playing safe because it's comfortable to you? Is there a dream? Is there an idea? Is there something that God has placed inside of you? Are you looking for others to do the thing that God called you to do? Is there something powerful and just amazing inside of you that's just bubbling up and you just don't know where to go with it? Are you looking for encouragement? Are you looking for other people to do it? Well, if you are, it's okay. We're gonna bring some encouragement. We're gonna bring some examples here on this show, and we're gonna have some fun. So again, thank you so much for joining us. Again, this is episode 0. Just wanted to drop in and encourage you a little bit. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. All right, peace.